It is said that before everything there was darkness so complete none knew what rode there. Maybe spirits from before, maybe the threesome themselves. But of the darkness nothing is written, only said. This is what is written. The right-hand God was born and brought life and light. The left-hand God made darkness come back. Between them stood the goddess, and she balanced them. That is the start of the creation myth of the order of the threesome on the continent of Kisangli in my world, the world of Sangwheel Chronicles. And creation myths are the topic of our conversation today. We'll take a look at some real world and fantasy examples, and we'll discuss where creation myths start, why they contain the elements that they do, and what role they play in world building your culture. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds. If you like this kind of content and you'd like to see me make more of it, you can support me on Ko-fi, or you can buy my books in the links down below. Okay, let's get cracking. Now, my creation myth started with nothingness, with there being nothing but emptiness, into which the immortal gods then created the world, the universe, and everything else. And obviously, I drew my inspiration from many real-world myths, and I'll discuss one in detail, which is the Zoroastrian myth. But if you're going to create a myth like that, a myth that starts from nothing, it does mean that you're setting up an environment where at least one of the gods is essentially all-powerful, because it is the creator god. It is the God that sets everything in motion, that is the source of your entire universe. Such a being is naturally exceptionally powerful, if there is a being guiding such a thing. So what you have to really think about is, if you're creating your creation myth in that fashion, why is the God restrained? Why doesn't the God directly impact human lives or elven lives or whatever lives there is? Why is the God of such a nature that it is all powerful, and yet there is suffering in the world, and yet the God is restrained from making human lives perfect? Now, what I did in my world was I said that these two gods, the creation god and the destruction god, right hand and left hand, created worlds every day, and the other one destroyed worlds every day, and the balancer, the goddess between them, studied the worlds they made. But she grew tired of constantly changing, of these worlds constantly changing, so she created a mechanism to freeze the world called the Great Wheel. And this Great Wheel stands between creation and the gods, and the power of the gods can only move through in little bits, in spokes. So the gods are all powerful behind the wheel. But before the wheel, they are not all powerful, and that's why their impact cannot be so directly felt on human beings. Now, you don't have to go that way and have physically restrained gods. What Raymond E. Feist did was he had also creation and destruction gods, Rothar and Mithar, in the world of Midkemia, and they created. The one created, the other destroyed. The destruction god was not completely on point. So he had a tendency to sometimes let bits of creation slide through his fingers, and those bits of creation eventually became the world itself. And these two gods still exist, and they still do their thing, but they don't have any impact on the world because they don't care. They are elemental forces of creation and destruction that basically move on an automaton device. So you could go that way, where it is all powerful, but it is stupid. The beings are dumb. They're not going to impact because they don't see the world as something to impact. Maybe stupid isn't the right word. Maybe it is that they are so far removed that they cannot conceive of anything worshipping them and asking them for help, which is also a possibility. And then from our world, one of the great examples of nothingness and creation myths that come from that, actually comes from the religion of Zoroastrianism, which is probably the world's oldest duology religion, a religion where you have a good and an evil. In the Zoroastrian creation myth, in the beginning, there was nothing in the world but Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, who lived in the endless light, and the evil spirit, Ahriman, who lived in absolute darkness. And between these realms was emptiness. One day, Ahura Mazda decided to make different creations. First, he shaped the sky, made of metal, shining and bright. Second, he made pure water. Third, he created the earth, flat and round, with no mountains or valleys. Fourth, he made plants, moist, with no thorns. Fifth, he created animals, big and small. Then he created the first man, called Gaiomart, bright, tall, and handsome. Last, he created fire and distributed it within the creation. The wise Lord ordered fire to serve mankind in preparing food and overcoming cold. The evil spirit peeked out of his dark world to see all the amazing new creations. The wise Lord called to him and said, "Evil spirit, aid my creatures and give them praise so that you will be immortal." The evil spirit snarled, "Why would I aid your creatures? Why should I praise them? I am more powerful. I will destroy you and your creatures." Then he crawled back to the darkness to shape demons, witches, monsters to attack the endless light. The wise Lord was all-knowing. He knew what the evil spirit was doing, and he also knew it would be his greatest battle against the dark side. So the wise Lord fashioned 6 spirits, the holy immortals, to guard his creation against the endless darkness. The wise Lord shaped the holy immortals from his own soul, giving each his own nature. So I'm not going to detail every holy spirit. You get the idea. There was a guardian of the sky, there was a guardian of peace and perfection, there was a guardian of man, etc. Ahriman saw the wise Lord's holy immortals and was enraged. "Ahura Mazda, I will destroy you and all your creations. You will never be victorious," he cried. So he and his demons attacked the gods' creations one by one. They tried to destroy the water, but they could only bring bitterness to it. They tried to destroy the earth, but they could only put mountains and valleys into it. They tried to wither the plants, but they only grew thorns. The evil spirit and his demons brought sadness against happiness, pain against pleasure, pollution against purification, and death against life. They attacked Gaiomart, the first man, and gave him sickness and death. The evil spirit thought he had destroyed mankind and became victorious against the light, but he was ignorant and foolish. When Gaiomart died, from his bones grew a rhubarb plant. After 40 years, a man and a woman, Maisha and Mashiana, grew out of the plant. So essentially we're Cabbage Patch Kids, which is really kind of awesome if you think about it. Anyway, Maisha and Mashayane promised the wise Lord that their children would help him in his battle with the evil spirit, then gave birth to 15 twins, and every pair scattered around the world and became a race. Then each person followed the threefold path of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Each became a follower of the wise Lord in his battle with the evil spirit. So you can see that in the Zoroastrianism principle, the good God is restrained by the fact that he has to battle with the evil God, with darkness, to keep light going. And it's very interesting that he created everything perfect and then the evil spirit came with destruction. What I also find interesting is that unlike other creation myths that follow this kind of trend, this one specifically makes no claim that it was man that brought about his own fall. It was an external evil that brought about the creation of suffering in the world. And it is man's duty to help combat that evil, which sets up inherently a society that, at least in principle, emphasizes the importance of acting in a good and just manner in order to help the god in his battle with the darkness. So that is a very deep point to think about when you're setting up your creation myth, is what kind of society do you want to grow from it? If you want a truly good society, then you would do well to have a creation myth like this, which in its very nature emphasizes the battle against evil as a continuous process. If you like that discussion about creation myths that start with nothingness, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about creation myths that have their origin in the primordial waters. So some creation myths don't start with nothing. They start with some kind of primordial waters on which the god drifted. The ocean is a very mysterious thing, and you can see people standing on the shore of it and looking out of it and thinking that it is eternal, that there is no end to it. And because they think this, it becomes the place from which everything was born. It becomes the thing to which we return. So if you're setting up a creation myth that has its origin in water, it's likely that your society finds water to be important and probably lives close to a large body of water, so that they have that effect where they stare out over the ocean and wonder, is there any end to it? Is this where everything started? A really great example of this kind of myth comes to us from the Egyptian mythology, specifically from the creation myth around the god Ra. Before creation, only darkness embraced the primeval ocean out of which life would come. Notice again there the emphasis on darkness. There's definitely a trend here. It was dark before creation. That seems to be a universal equivalent. Anyway, before creation, only darkness embraced the primeval ocean out of which life would come. When the breath of life was strong and ready, the entity called Atum decided it was time for creation to begin. An island emerged from the water to support this divinity, who manifested itself in the form of Ra, the sun god. On a primeval hill, Ra created out of himself the first god, Shu, dryness and air, and his partner, Tefnut, humidity, who would engender other gods to complete the cosmos. I just want to pause here and say, look at the order of creation here. You have Ra, the sun god. Then you have dryness and air and Tefnut, humidity. So you've got a very definitive things that are really important in a desert culture coming through and in a strong way there. So that's something else to think about, is the order of creation of your gods and what that says about your culture and where they place the importance of the portfolios of the gods. So back to the creation, so back to filling the cosmos. Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. In turn, these two birthed the principles of life, namely Osiris, the perfect being, who eventually would rule over the rest of the world, which Ra was busy creating by naming the elements. And humankind were the tears that fell from Ra's eyes. The legend does then go on to cover how Osiris becomes king and so on, but this is the part that's really central to the water creation story. I think that it's really interesting that we are the god's tears in this legend. I also think that the method of creation is really important here as well. Notice that Ra is said to create by naming the elements, which means that these elements actually existed before. He just named them. So creation seems to have been an ongoing process set in place by Atum, who became Ra, but I have a feeling that the implication is that Atum was actually more powerful than Ra. When he became the sun god, he left some of that cosmic power behind and retained it only in his ability to name the elements. If I saw such a creation myth in a fantasy novel, I would expect that the magic system would have a tie back to naming magic, and that you would also probably have a culture that is strongly based on a desert culture and on a culture where water is very important. due to the order in which the gods were created. And if you like that story around water creation, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about becoming as opposed to creation. So in some myths, the creator being dies or excretes something that becomes the world and becomes people and so on. Sort of like Ra's tears creating men, but much more extensive than that. These myths generally mean that the god either lost something in order to actually create the world, or that the god is dead. The god died in the process of creating the world, which is kind of convenient because it leaves you in a position where you can have the, people living on the carcass of the god, and that's why there's no actual god, because he died giving birth to the world. So this sets people up to believe that they live on the body of the god and that they might need to tend it in certain ways. So I would expect such a religion to be heavily focused around holy places that are the remains of the god and, looking after the god's body in terms of taking care of the plants that grow on it and so on. So I could see such myths giving rise to a culture that is very heavily focused on totemism and on earth worship, places of special significance in the earth. So a really good example of this kind of myth comes to us from China in the shape of the egg of Pengku. At the beginning of time, the universe had the shape of an egg. When the egg broke, a dragon called Pengku came out of it, along with two basic elements, yin and yang. Yang formed the sky, and yin condensed to become earth. After 18,000 years, Pengku died. I would just like to say that is an awfully specific number, 18,000 years exactly. That is how long Pengku lived, and then he died. I don't know why that number is there. If you know, let me know in the comments below why it's 18,000 years. Anyway, after 18,000 years, Pengku died. From his head were created the sun and the moon. From his blood, the rivers and seas. From his breath, the wind. And from his voice, thunder. Finally, human beings were generated from the fleas which lived on him. Yep, we are in fact the fleas of a dragon. Stardust, dragon fleas, tears of Ra, who's counting? Anyway, so that's an example of a creation myth where the creation is born from the shape and the body of an immortal god. You also get this in Africa with the rainbow serpent, which I discussed when I discussed dragons in Africa. Let's move on to using your creation myth as an origin story. So sometimes your creation myth is not so much about the creation of the world, but it is about the origin of the gods. Kind of like a superhero origin story, except that, they're gods and they might be a little bit psychotic like Zeus, etc. What this kind of story gives you is the ability to set up that your gods are not all powerful. Clearly, these guys are not the creators of the universe. They're just extremely powerful spirits who do extremely powerful things and will sometimes bless mankind if they're, imported and entreated to do the right thing. And as I said, a great example of this comes from the Greek creation myth. Oftentimes, these kinds of creation myths also involve, killing the older gods. And often that involves a certain amount of patricide because you have sons killing their fathers. A great example of this comes from the Greek creation myth. So first there was Gaia and Uranus, and they made, the earth and the sky. Uranus hid the Cyclopses and the 100-handed ones, I cannot pronounce that word, in Gaia. This caused Gaia immense suffering, and so she convinced the Titans to rebel against their father, her third children, the Titans. While Gaia and Uranus were getting it on, Kronos swept in and eliminated Uranus's boy bits. Incidentally, the boy bits landed in the ocean and gave rise to the goddess Aphrodite, so there's that. But anyway, back to Kronos, who's now become the king of the gods and, taken his father's place. Now, there was a prophecy that his son would overthrow him as well, so he ate all his children. But his wife Rhea hid Zeus on the island of Crete and gave Kronos a stone wrapped in swaddling cloths to eat. I don't know how he mistook a stone for a baby, but he did, and he ate it, and Zeus grew up on the island of Crete and then eventually came and killed his dad and took his place, and the whole little cycle repeated itself. I think that kind of origin story where you have such patricide definitely sets up a somewhat adversarial society between, children and parents. I mean, it's setting a godly example of, if you live too long, Papa, I might just knife you. And I wonder if that has anything to do with agriculture and the way that we inherit wealth from one generation to the next, and whether it's an outgrowth of I need my parents to die so that I can have my inheritance. It's an interesting thought. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts around it. Let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit the thumbs up button. And let's chat about using your creation myth to emphasize certain elements and norms and behaviors in your society. Now, in our world, the creation myths often set up a women bad, men in charge of the home kind of setup. It's almost universal. Not quite, but almost. For a specific example of that, let's take a look at the birth of Japan. So before the formation of the world, when the land was formless, like a jellyfish, the first deities came into being at Takamagahara, the high plane of heaven. Beginning with the 3 primal kami, 7 successive generations of gods and goddesses came into being. The 7th generation, consisting of the male kami, Izanagi, he who invites, and the female kami, Izanami, she who invites. The older generation of kami assigned Izanagi and Izanami the task of bringing order and structure to the shapeless chaos that was the world. To help them accomplish this, the couple were given a jeweled spear called Ama no Nobuku. From the heavenly floating bridge, Izanagi and Izanami peered down at the mass below, not knowing how to begin with the work of creation. Finally, they tried stirring the chaos with the point of the spear. As the spear lifted back up, a drop fell from it, creating the island of Onogoru. Izanagi and Izanami decided to make their home there and built a palace called the 8-Measure Palace. In the very center of the palace stood a pillar, the heavenly august pillar. And there they have this discussion about body parts. He's got a fleshy bit between her legs. She's got a gap there. So they're like, let's put these two things together. So they decided to circle this heavenly august pillar. And when they met the first time, the girl Izanami spoke first. And then the guy spoke, and then they hugged and did the thing that mommies and daddies do if they love each other very much. And then Izanami gave birth. But she gave birth to a leech child, a child without limbs, without bones, without anything. So they put this child into a reed boat and set it off across the ocean. And then they went to the older kamis and they were like, what was up with that? And the older kami said, well, it's because the women spoke first. That's not right and proper. So they went back down, they went to their pillar, they went around it. This time Izanagi spoke first, and the child came out beautiful and perfect, and Izanami gave birth to the islands of Japan. So it's very much an emphasis of the place of a woman in society. And that's something that I also leaned into, but not the place of the woman in society, because that wasn't the society I wanted to build in my world. I leaned into the importance of the threesome marriage and the combination of 2 men and 1 woman, with a woman balancing her 2 husbands. So you can use your creation myth to emphasize the key norms of the society that you're building. What do these people believe as their morality, as their center, as their norms? And use your creation myth to emphasize those norms. And if you like the discussion of emphasizing norms, hit the thumbs up button and let's chat. And let's chat about the role of animals in creation myths. Now, so far, many of the creation myths that we've spoken about have ended in man being in dominion. Man has dominance over the world. It's all there for him to use. It's there for him to use to fight against the evil, or for him to use to earn his wages or for him as a gift from the god to man. But there are other creation myths where man works together with the animals, and often these are rising creation myths or sinking creation myths or somehow coming out of another world into this one creation myth. And one of the great examples of it actually comes from the Iroquois people of North America. Basically, the people all lived in the sky world, and then the sky mother fell pregnant with twins, and her husband was really, really angry about this for whatever reason. And he ripped out one of the light-bearing trees, and as she looked down into the hole, he kicked her through the hole. And two birds rescued her and set her down on the earth, and the animals made for her a place to walk. They made land so that she could walk on the land, and she grew to live with the animals and she therefore lived on this land that the animals had created. So it was a kind of partnership between the sky mother and the animals that, created the land and made sure she landed safely and all the rest of that. In that kind of culture, you're often looking for a more nomadic culture, a culture that lives with the rhythms of the land, rather than a culture that imposes order the way an agricultural society does. Remember, an agricultural society basically forces the land to yield what they want it to yield, whereas a nomadic culture lives from the land in a hunter-gatherer fashion. I'm not saying one is better or one is whatever. These are just these two types of societies, and therefore I think that is why the creation myths are so very different. Because on the one hand, your hunter-gatherer, more nomadic societies would emphasize the importance of living in harmony with animals because you have to live in that rhythm. The agricultural society would emphasize how man is given dominion because you have to wrest the earth into submission in order to have agriculture. That is just my opinion. You are free to disagree. Let me know in the comments if you do. And if you enjoyed that discussion of animal involvement in creation myths, hit the thumbs up button. And those are my thoughts on creation myths in fantasy. If you like this video, maybe check out my video on how to create a totemistic religion. And if you want to connect around this topic or any others, I do have a Discord server linked down below. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World.